I'm here today with Naomi Kingery, and she is someone who I just adore. She has so much experience in a lot of ways with life and with chronic illness, and also her walk with God, and just in a lot of different ways she's had more experience than her years. So I'm delighted to have her here for Invisible Illness Week, and I think it's really important that we bring a young person's perspective into the chronic illness arena, because so often when we tell someone we have a certain disease, they say, oh, you're too young to have that. And I'm over 40 now, and someone just told me that last week again at a little shop. So it seems like no matter how old you get, a lot of times people tend to think you're too young to have that, and that can be very, very hard because you don't feel like it's validated, or they're basically saying you don't know what you're talking about. And so I think Naomi brings a great perspective of a young person's perspective on that too. So Naomi, tell us a little bit about yourself first of all, and what it was like being under 20 and being diagnosed with a chronic illness, diabetes, just kind of out of the blue.
Perfect. Hi, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Happy Invisible Illness Week. I'm super excited to be here. So as Lisa just asked me, I'm going to just kind of share a little bit of my story, and then we'll kind of go more in depth later. But my story actually started 23 years ago. I was born in Bangalore, India, to Christian missionary parents. And they had a disability organization there. They actually still do quite a bit of work overseas. And so I grew up around a lot of physical struggle, and there were people in wheelchairs and people who couldn't walk, and we would go to doctor's appointments with those who just had surgery so they could go to school for the first time. And I always saw what physical pain was, and I was around it growing up my whole life. And then when I turned 12 years old, my family just kind of decided that it was time for me and both of my older siblings to go away to a boarding school. At that point, we'd kind of tried quite a few different schools in the area, and they just hadn't worked. And so we looked into this Christian boarding school that was 6 hours away from my parents. And I was 12 years old and nervous to leave home for the first time, of course. And I was okay, though, because I was with my brother and sister, right? And so I'm the baby of the family. I kind of clung on to them as we left home. And so we went to this boarding school, and I think it impacted me the most, probably being away from my parents. But those first 2 weeks of schooling experience, I started to get sick. And I was showing flu-like symptoms, but it started to look a little bit more serious. There was one night where I threw up 8 times. A lot of the other symptoms would be just feeling weak and tired, or getting really shaky all of a sudden, or my vision would get blurry, and I'd get thirsty, and I'd drink so much water, and then I'd be running to the bathroom because of all the water I was drinking. And so I was showing these symptoms. I didn't really know what was going on. Neither did the school nurse. And so one night I was in the nurse's office, and there was a girl there with diabetes. And she said, you know what, let's check Naomi's blood sugar. There's something going on here. These symptoms look a little bit familiar to me. At that point, I didn't know what diabetes was. Here I wasn't even a teenager yet, right? So I knew a little bit about health, but hadn't gone into the in-depth health courses yet in high school or anything like that. So I said, okay, diabetes, cool, let's see what happens. So they checked my blood sugar that night, and it was 525. And for those of you watching, you may not be familiar with diabetes, and I feel like that's part of my job here now, is to say, I've been diagnosed with this, now I've got to be an advocate and to teach people about it. So I'll teach you a little bit, which is normal blood sugar. If you were to probably check your blood sugar right now, it would be between 80 and 120. And so the fact that my blood sugar was 525 showed some very serious signs, and showed serious enough signs that I ended up going into a coma that night. I woke up the next morning with a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes at the age of 12 in Bangalore, India. So quite the ordeal, but here I am today, 11 years later, actually, and just kind of living my life, doing everything I can to make a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to embrace this, I'm going to move forward with diabetes, and I'm going to make something good out of it. So that's kind of the beginning of my story. It's been quite the adventure so far, but I'm excited to be here today.
Well, I know I've heard your story before, but I'm always surprised about how significant, the drastic change was from day to day that quickly, and that your mom and dad weren't there beside you when it happened at first,
Yeah.
What is your day to day like now?
Yeah, so now things have actually changed quite a bit over the years, but when I first was diagnosed with diabetes, I went up to 8 injections every single day. And so when you have diabetes, your pancreas in your body, it doesn't make the insulin that you need. So if somebody without diabetes was to eat an apple or to have any kind of food, your pancreas would start to kind of produce this insulin, and it would release the insulin hormone to then stabilize your blood sugar. And what happens in my body is it doesn't produce that insulin anymore. I would do those manual multiple daily injections every day, and also check my blood sugar, which includes poking your finger with a little needle. I would do that about 10 times a day. A year later, I went to the insulin pump, which is a medical device that I now wear, and you're hooked up to the pump, so it actually gives you the insulin that you need. And it took me from doing 8 shots every day to just 1 shot every 2 to 3 days, along with still checking my blood sugar. So now I wear the pump, which is how I actually use the medical device to stabilize my blood sugar and to give me the medicine that I need. But I've used the pump to help me get through. I went through middle school and then high school, college. Now I'm going to college and working a career at the same company that makes my insulin pump, Medtronic Diabetes. So I'm working there now as well. But my daily routine changes every day. And I think the hardest part about having a chronic illness is, yes, some days your disease might be consistent. It might be managing itself. It might be stable that day. It might be a good day for you. But every day changes. And what I've seen, especially as I entered college and as I kind of went through these different hurdles in life, it was fine when I went to high school, when every day was this consistent schedule. I knew exactly when to eat. I knew when to give my insulin. But then when you throw in changing schedules every semester, things become very inconsistent. And so my everyday right now is just trying to plan around what those daily tasks look like. So I wake up every morning and I say, okay, what do I have ahead of me today? Now that actually includes a full-time job, so I know that that's consistent, which is hard on its own. Then you add in college and all these other things I'm doing, but you wake up, you check your blood sugar, you see where your blood sugar's at. Normally that number will literally tell you how your body's going to feel that day. Because if your numbers are out of whack, your body will be out of whack and you're going to feel it. And for all of you listening who have some kind of a chronic illness, whether you have diabetes, whether you have arthritis, or anything across this broad spectrum, at the end of the day, we've got to say, we're going to do what's in our control. Which for me, what's in my control is checking my blood sugar. It's giving me my insulin when I need it, when I know that my body's going to need that extra dose. And it's making sure that I'm eating right and that I'm exercising and that I'm paying attention to my body. And sometimes that means forcing myself to rest. And I think that's probably the hardest part for most of you listening, is to say, you know what, some days you've got to put your body first and you've got to just take care of yourself. And life can come next, because if you don't feel good, you're not going to be able to live out your dreams. And you're not going to feel as good while you're doing this. You might push yourself, but then you might cry yourself to sleep at night, like I do sometimes. And so it's important that every single day that we're kind of listening to our bodies, that we're doing what we can that's in our control. Then for what's not in our control, that's where faith comes in.
Now, I know that you definitely are doing a great job managing it right now. And speaking of rest, and you're learning to balance. But that must have been really hard as a teenager to do, because your disease does not necessarily change all aspects of growing up and going through those teenage years, and even the different hormones that are in our bodies that naturally occur could have an effect, I would think, on blood sugar and those kind of things. And, you know, everybody says teenagers are moody already. But, you know, you had some reasons besides just being a teenager to be a little bit moody, and even going through some grief, the grief process of having to cope with this and wanting it to just go away and be like everybody else. How did that affect you, and what would you tell other young people who are going through that process of just trying to grow up and learn how the world works, and then having to deal with this disease on top of it every day?
I'll say it's hard, and I think that if we first realize that, that can help, because what tends to happen sometimes, or at least what happened in my case, was I kept telling myself, it's going to get better. I'm going to just wake up one day and all of it's going to be normal and I'm not going to have to do any of this. But then I kept waking up every day with this word diabetes on the front of my mind. And then I get in a few years more, and then it's like, oh, okay, now I'm entering high school. I've had this diabetes thing a few years and things haven't necessarily changed. Maybe my outlook has a little bit, but it's hard. And once I realized how challenging it would be, I then said, okay, now that I kind of know what the reality is, and I didn't try to sugarcoat it or just look at the upsides, I said, okay, it's hard, now what, right? So I think the hardest part is, as you're entering those teen years, I've always said, you know, being a teenager is probably hard enough on its own, then you throw in a disease on the side, it's going to get harder, of course. But at the end of the day, I think all of us have to find a way to take one step back from our struggle and from our pain and from what we're dealing with physically and say, you know what, we're here, we're sitting here, we're alive, we're celebrating Invisible Illness Week, and we're breathing, right? God has blessed us with this life. And I realized that really early on, probably more so than the teenagers around me, which was hard because I then had this new perspective of life is beautiful and this is such a huge blessing. And then you hear somebody complain about homework, and I'm like, oh, I have homework, but I also have 8 injections a day. My heart is also now beating very fast from that symptom this morning. And you kind of think in this weird spot where it's like, nobody around me really gets it. And at a young age, I realized that I would then be coping with mentally and physically things that the people around me wouldn't necessarily understand. For some time, I blamed them, and I said, you know what, you don't get it, I'm not even going to talk to you about it. But then I started to realize they don't get it, and that's my job to explain it to them. And I finally had to create that communication with my family, and I said, I'm in high school right now. Things are tough. Things are really challenging on me. Let me explain to you what goes on in the back of my head when we go out to eat at a restaurant. Let me talk to you about how it really makes me sad that I can't order an Oreo cookie milkshake every day. And let me talk to you about how I go through these internal struggle and these thoughts all day long. And let me explain this to you so then when you see me get moody or when you see me get sad or just angry at what's going on, maybe you'll try to understand a little bit more. It's not their fault they don't understand it. It was partly my fault for not explaining that to them. And I think that's what's going to be really important for all of us is if people can't see the struggle that we're going through, if we don't talk about it, we're doing everybody a disservice. Because then we're having a hard time, they're having a hard time watching us go through this, and then we're not helping each other out. So I realized that during my high school years, I started to really become an advocate, talk to people about it, share about it. I had to force myself to be vulnerable and to be open and to say, you know what? I'm not a typical teenager. I'm not like you who just has to wear glasses. I have to wear glasses and I have diabetes and an insulin pump on my hip. And I found ways to kind of take those quirky teenage things to then add a chronic illness onto that list and to just say, you know what, as all teens have to embrace different things in their lives, this is just one thing that I'm going to live with. And then I'm going to find a way to do so by really not just living with it because these are the cards I've been dealt or because this is the way that things are, but by saying, I'm Naomi, I have diabetes, it's not going to define me, but I'm going to be the diabetic diva, which is a nickname I gave myself, and I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to do something with this, and I'm going to excel through high school. I had these optimistic thoughts, and then life started getting in the way, right? What started to happen was my sophomore year of high school, I think I had like 25 absences that first semester. And what started happening was my body just could not handle high school every day. Some people with diabetes can handle so much more than that. Great for them. I'm proud of them, but my body couldn't do it. At the time, I was also being diagnosed with asthma and hypothyroidism and low blood pressure and just this list that goes on. And so I ended up having to be homeschooled. But through that, I was able to graduate from high school a year early. And you look at these things and you say, no, maybe my story isn't typical of all people dealing with chronic illness in high school, but at the end of the day, it made me so weak that I couldn't go to school every day. But I still had my mind and I still had my health to be able to be at home and to get through that and to graduate, to walk across that stage and to have my picture on the front page of the newspaper with the graduating class. And then you have these life accomplishments and you thank God because of it, and then they feel so much better.
Now, it sounds like you had a good handle on this as a teenager, and you learned your routine, and you learned what worked and what didn't, and how to communicate really well with those around you. And now you're on to the next phase of your life. And just like those of us who are teenagers, a lot of people struggle with those early 20s, trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life, where they should live, they should have an apartment, a roommate, all those basic kind of things, maybe new relationships, all that stuff. And it's hard to do when you're a healthy 20-something-year-old. But I can imagine it must be even more difficult when you're trying to manage this disease and manage not just your time, but manage your energy level and try to fit in the fun stuff as well as the things like working.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's quite an interesting process. I'll say I was super excited to kind of get through my teen years and to say I graduated high school, now it's going to happen. And then you start to get a little bit scared, but it's like, here's my future ahead of me, what's next? How am I going to handle what's next? Because when you're in high school, you kind of have this little bubble of everybody knows you have diabetes because by then maybe you've had it a few years and your school nurse knows you and you kind of have this routine. But then you start to meet new people, you start to get out there into the world, and you start to think about things like college or career. And what happened with me was it was a little bit interesting because I graduated from high school in Texas, and in this time period, my dad actually got a job here in California. And so what started happening was we kind of sat back as a family and we said, okay, my dad has this great opportunity in California. My brother and I just graduated from high school in Texas. My sister was going to college still there in Texas. And we kind of sat back as a family and said, okay, now what? And so we as a family kind of packed up our cars and we drove out to California, and that's where I'm sitting today. I've been here now 6 years, which is crazy to think about. But so it was interesting because I graduated high school. I then left everything that I knew because at that point my lives had been kind of between India and between Texas, and now we were going to move to California, this new place that I'd never been to. So not only was I starting to think about college and career, but I was also thinking about, oh my gosh, now we're starting over in California. I have to make new friends now. I have to find a new church. I have to get out there in the world and see what it's like in a new place yet again after moving my whole life. And so I was excited but nervous about the move, of course. So my family moved here. I actually started at a community college that was close to our house. I went there with my brother. I started to see how college was going to be hard on me because it wasn't like high school with a consistent schedule. And so I ended up actually it was about an average of just 2 classes a semester, and I did about 8 units every semester, and it took me a long time to just get my associate's degree. For what should have taken 2 years for a normal person or for a full-time student, I took 4 years to get my associate's degree and to walk across that stage very proudly. That was hard on me, and it was hard to see that I was so excited to transition out of high school and everybody's happy to start college and to have all these new experiences, but to me, new experiences meant new schedules, and that made me a little bit fearful, and that made me question what a future with a chronic illness like diabetes would be like, because things keep changing, and things kept changing those first few years. So I actually went to community college for 4 years. My focus right now is kinesiology, which is all about the study of human movement, so it's learning what the human body's capable of. And I started to see what was happening was this diagnosis in my life started to change everything I wanted to do. I no longer wanted to be an interior decorator, but I wanted to teach yoga to people with diabetes, and I wanted to write books about diabetes and to go to school to learn more about the human body, and to then one day work at a medical device company that is all about diabetes. And that made me thankful because I said, you know what, at this point, of course it was hard, of course there's the ups and downs, but at the end of the day, I saw how diabetes was changing my life path. And I saw that God's hand was all over that situation. And so entering college, of course it was exciting, but of course it was hard. I got through at least that associate's degree. Right now I'm pushing to get my 4-year bachelor's degree, and it's kind of one of those next big milestones that I'm focused on. I'm also working now full-time, which means also that there's more stress on my body, and so I've transitioned also to this next semester I'm only going to do 1 class. That's hard for me to think through of how hard how long, how much I'm going to have to push through just to get a bachelor's degree if I go at this pace. But if I don't go at this pace and I try to double up my work and try to push myself even harder, I'm going to have some consequences and I'm not going to feel good. And I tried to do that for a few years. Once I got out of high school, I started to push myself, and I said, maybe I can do everything I've always wanted to do. But I saw very soon, yes, I can do everything I've always wanted to do, but maybe not all at the same time. So right now I'm kind of at that phase where I'm trying to slow down a little bit. I'm trying to prioritize. And to be able to say that at this age means that I've matured so fast. And I've matured at such a rate that shows me that it is all because of my chronic illness. I'm not that typical 20-something that goes out there and tries to conquer the world. I'm going to try to conquer the world, but I'm going to do it while taking care of my chronic illness. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be how I'm going to get there.
Now, one of the things you mentioned were your books, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about them. I've heard from, I'm a fan of yours, and I've heard from people who have said, I don't have diabetes, but these help me so much. And I've heard from people who were, in their 50s or 60s who said, I'm not young, but these books help me so much. But I know you really have a heart for young people, because a lot of times there's just not very many resources for them that speak to the day-to-day challenges they face, and they can be quite different than those of us who are, maybe retired or on disability. So tell us a little bit about your books and where you found the passion to write on top of everything else you're doing, and how it's helped you cope with your chronic illness itself, being able to share what you've learned with others.
A little bit, I started to bottle everything in, and maybe for those of you listening, you've probably tried that before. Maybe you're right there right now, just bottling in the way that you're feeling. And what started to confuse me was I would be in doctor's appointments, and I would hear about the physical impact of an illness. I would hear about what my body was doing physiologically and the stress that it was under and the things that I would have to do to take care of myself. But doctors wouldn't talk about how I would feel self-conscious because there was something different about me, or they wouldn't say, hey, you know what, after a hard day, you may cry sometimes, or you may get moody, not just because you're a teenager, but because that's actually a symptom of diabetes. You're going to get irritable when things go wrong. And so I started to write about both the good and the bad of what I was going through, and at the age of 15, I said, okay, I've had diabetes 3 years. I think it's time to start to talk to other people about what I'm going through. Not just my family, but maybe even people I've never met. And so that was when I started writing my first book called Sugar-Free Me, which is an inspirational book for diabetic teens and their loved ones. And it was the simple premise of, hey, I've been diagnosed with a disease that I didn't know anything about, and now I'm going through my teen years, and this is what I'm going through. If you're sitting there and your body doesn't work like those next to you, maybe you could read my book. Maybe you can learn something from what I went through. And I've always said, as I continue to write, if I share one thing that helps you embrace your illness, if I share just one thing that changes your experience, and I stop one tear from coming down your face, that's why I've done it. Because if we don't go through experiences and share it, why are we going through it? It's important that we really unite and that we find a way to talk about this, and that's why I love this week so much. I love the week so much that I actually wrote about it in Sugar-Free Me, about the fact that it's so important that we get together and that we talk, and that we say, you know what, you can't see that there's something wrong with me, but I'm going to tell you about it instead of trying to hide it just because we can. Mm-hmm. So Sugar-Free Me was a huge success. That was my first paperback, and it was just a really good way for me to get plugged into the diabetes community. Since then, I've written 2 ebooks, which are available on Amazon Kindle or Barnes & Noble Nook. And the first ebook was called Sugar-Free Teens, which is the Diabetic Diva's 5 Tips on Reaching Your Potential. It was a shorter book. It was literally me saying, I'm sitting here on my 20th birthday. Here's what I learned during my teen years. Let me share them with you. And it's just kind of a document of a conversation that I wish I could have with those who have any illness, specifically diabetes, but to say, hey, you're going through your teen years, I got through mine, let's talk. And that was Sugar-Free Teens. And last fall, I came out with Sugar-Free Support, which was literally just me sitting down and saying, okay, I've gone through my teen years. I've talked to those dealing with diabetes. Now it's time to really share what I would like my support team to know, and those people around me, those people who see what I'm going through but may not fully understand it. And so it was me just kind of writing to my loved ones and to those people who are caretakers of those with illness. And so that just came out last August, which I'm really excited about. Right now I'm actually just finishing out my last part of the series, which will be a last paperback called Sugar Free Journey. The idea is it's called the Sugar Free series. It's kind of this umbrella of books about the emotions of diabetes. And it's my documentation of what I'm going through. The reason I've always been focused on the younger years is because that was what I was going through at the time. That's all I knew to say, you know what, I kind of feel like an expert in this area because I'm living with this every day. I might not have a medical diploma on my wall, but I have an insulin pump on my hip. So I'm going to talk to you about what that might feel like. And so it's just been an awesome process for me. It's a huge way for me to just kind of share what I'm going through. It forces me to be open. It forces me to be vulnerable. And it forces me to look at both the ups and downs of diabetes, which I've mentioned is very important to me.
Sounds like good advice. What encouragement do you have that you could offer someone today who just feels overwhelmed by it all, who is sick of the dailiness of having a chronic condition, and they look at you and think, how can she be this age and have this figured out?
I've had to push myself to be okay with myself without that mascara on. I will say today I have on a lot of foundation because I didn't sleep very well last night because my blood sugar's kind of been all over the place these last few days. I stayed in bed this weekend. Right, and so I think sometimes we just have to be honest and say, maybe I don't look like I'm struggling right now, but I don't feel that great today, and that's okay. I think at the end of the day, you just got to be okay with yourself first at your weakest points. You've got to find your ways to just say, you know what, this is who I am, I can do this. And the first way that I did that in that hospital bed was by opening up my Bible and by praying and by asking Christ to just walk with me and to show me why he allowed this to happen in my life. If I wasn't supposed to have diabetes, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. But now I have this great friend named Lisa Copen and these amazing ministries that I can now work with to say, it's okay that I have diabetes. And God has shown me that invisible illness has a place in this world. It's a hard place and it's a challenging place, but it's also a place of healing and of comfort and of unity and of people encouraging one another. Because if we weren't sad today, we wouldn't be sitting here feeling a need for encouragement. So I think we just got to thank God for our blessings. I've mentioned my support team. They've been a huge encouragement to me. At the end of the day, just find what's going to work for you. It could be getting outside of your bedroom, right, and going out into the world and going to volunteer for an organization. It could be serving Thanksgiving dinner to the homeless. It could be going and doing a canned food drive for people in need and finding ways to say it's not all about me. There's actually other people out there who have struggle as well. And that's been a key part of my journey of realizing that and of forcing myself to realize that on days when I don't want to. And at the end of the day, just know that you're not alone in this at all. And you can do this, and you can live out your dreams. You can accomplish everything that you need to. It might hurt sometimes, and you may be weak some days, but you're here, and you've been given this task of having a chronic illness or of loving someone with one. And now it's just saying, this is what I've been given. Now how am I going to do this? Of course it's hard, but it's more than doable. It's something that will shape me into who I am, and I can say today that I'm the adult that I am because of my diabetes and because of the other illnesses that have entered my life. And for that, I'm thankful.
Naomi, go ahead and tell us about where your website is and how people can find your books. And I know you have a lot of articles and other things online, and just kind of connect with you in general.
Yeah. I would love to connect with any of you listening. I want to offer my support and to say please get in touch with me if you ever need anything, even if you just want to talk or have questions about diabetes or anything. My website is www.livetoloveddiabetes.com. And my website actually has direct links for you to buy my books through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can get them in the different formats there. You can read my weekly diabetes blog where I just kind of chronicle what I'm going through that week and what I've experienced with my diabetes. You can connect with me on Twitter at Naomi Kingery, and you can find me on Facebook with the Sugar Free Series. Go like them. So connect with me, get online, check out my website, and from there you can kind of have that central hub to get you to where you need to go to just learn more about me and my work in the community. But I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much.